Redditors who were the final people to see a missing person. Have they been found? And how has their disappearance affected you? I worked in a very small public library years ago. There was a young man, maybe 8 to 10 years older than me, that came in every few days for several months. He was very intelligent and extremely interesting. We talked often. One day he came in. We talked for a while and he asked me to make sure he had returned everything he had checked out. I did, and before he left he thanked me for always helping him and being nice, etc. He walked up the street to his apartment and shot himself. I always wished that I had realized he was saying goodbye. I had somewhat of a similar experience. My best friend suffered with suicidal ideation for the entirety of the several years that I knew her. She had attempted a few times unsuccessfully, and I hated the fact that it could been successful and I wouldn't have had closure. So one day, while we were talking about her suicidal thoughts, I asked her to promise me that if she was ever going to attempt again and was not willing to accept help or get talked out of it, that she would say goodbye in a way that I wouldn't realize was goodbye at the time, but gave me some sort of closure. Fast forward a few months, and she was insistent on talking to me on the phone one night. We never really spoke on the phone, so I found this odd, but thought maybe she felt lonely or something, so we talked for about an hour. She promised she was safe, and we exchanged I love yous and good nights. But after our call she successfully took her life. I only found out because police called me the next day wanting to talk to me, since I was the last contact anyone had with her. Honestly, I completely regret asking for that goodbye because it led to a lot of guilt that I missed. Obvious, in hindsight, red flags that night that could have saved her. So I really understand what you mean when you say you wished you had known he was saying goodbye. It's not a good feeling at all. I'm sorry about your friend. I do think it was beautiful that she loved you so much she kept her promise. Jesus Christ, man. That is one of the most haunting things I've ever read. I hope you're doing well and not blaming it on yourself. Similar thing happened to my grandfather's brother. Roughly 40 years ago on a Sunday, everyone was going out to church. Grandpa's brother said he wasn't feeling well, so he didn't go. Grandpa was the last person he saw, and before he left to church, his brother told him he loves him, something he'd never told anyone. They found him hanging in the basement after they came back, and Grandpa always seemed to blame himself. I didn't really blame myself, but I have always thought about the life he didn't get to live. We talked a lot, so I did realize that life had deeply damaged and disappointed him, and sometimes it seemed his obvious intelligence kept him isolated. I'm not even sure if that makes sense, but it seemed like he understood things on such a deep level that he lost all hope. I'm sorry your grandpa felt so much guilt. That's a horrible burden to carry, and it shouldn't have been his. I was 8 years old when I went with my parents to drop off my little sister for visitation with her biological father. The next morning, my dad woke me up for school and said she didn't come back that night. My dad went to Denver. We knew the BO dad had family in this area for the weekend to go try to look for them and contacted the Denver PD. My local PD didn't assist in finding her at all. In fact, the DA told my parents that you can't abduct your own child despite the fact that my parents had full custody. I will never forget the day that we got the call that she was found. I was with my mom and 2 of my other sister at the grand opening of the Cowbelly in my hometown when my mom answered her phone and burst into tears. She was in a small town in Michigan, had been homeschooled by the wife of her BO dad, and was going by her middle name. An officer responded to a missing person report. Ironic, because the oldest son of the wife had run away. Some way, somehow, the officer knew something was wrong and looked into the situation. The whole situation was much more difficult on my sister than me. She was basically 2 years behind in school when she came back, and the principal of our elementary school wanted to put her in 1st grade rather than 3rd, which is what she should been in at the time. But they ultimately kept her in 3rd grade with our sister. The 2 are 10 days apart in age and have been best friends their whole life. She got tutoring and managed to get back on track. She is currently in her senior year and looking forward to college in the fall. You can absolutely abduct your own child if you don't have custody. What was the DA thinking? Is it different in Colorado? One of the worst things in criminal cases are where the police just don't help. They don't listen to the victim. They don't look into situations that are obviously strange and alarming. They don't follow up, etc. Like, that's their job, but because someone didn't want to do work it ends in someone being kidnapped or killed. They were found committed suicide in a motel room. I was ignorant and did not realize he was reaching out for help. That realization after the fact hit me hard. I saved his last email to me and read it as a reminder every so often. This happened to me as well. In high school I ran into a friend while out gallivanting as a teenager overnight in a park. He was offering up some of his personal possessions saying he was cleaning out his room. He went missing shortly after, and his body was found a few weeks later. I still wonder what I could have done if I'd realized this was a sign of suicidal ideation. I think about that night often. This person didn't go missing, but I was the last person to see him alive. My best friend and I were drinking on my porch in college. It was about 3:30 AM, and I told him I was going to bed because I had to work the next day. He begged me to have another drink with him, but I insisted that I needed to get to sleep. The next morning I woke up to my roommate screaming for me to come downstairs. I ran down, and my friend had hung himself while sitting down under the porch railing. We cut him down, did CPR even though we knew he was gone already. It was the most traumatic things I've witnessed and had really affected my life. I pieced together things from the night like the rope he hung himself with was his friend's dog leash that we searched for a long time for and could not find. We think he hid the leash as a premeditated event. Just thinking that he begged to spend just a little more time with me, but I refused really hurts. My father had esophageal cancer and had been fighting it for about 3 years. During that time I ran the family business, so we would have income and so that he could keep his insurance and get treatment. I was maybe 16 at the time. Well, one night I'm doing the dishes and me and my parents get into a fight. Something inside me snapped that had been holding together for the last 3 years. I suddenly knew what I had to do. Kill myself. It would solve everything. It was like autopilot. My body moved. I didn't have to think about it. It was natural, like destiny. I told them I wanted to die and ran for the gun safe which was upstairs far away. My father, who had been very strong before and fairly heavy, tried to block me. I pushed past him, knocking him to the floor. I barely felt it when I hit him. I didn't know how weak he had become, as somehow in my mind I still saw him as strong and indestructible until that moment. In that moment my dad went from being the superhero that is dad to being human. Anyways, I didn't stop to help him up. Instead I ran crying upstairs trying to open the gun safe. I couldn't read the dial through my own tears, and suddenly all of the energy I had getting there drained and my body felt extremely heavy and I fell to my knees. My father had pulled himself up and made his way up the stairs. He grabbed me, pulling me away from the safe, and told my little brother to call the police. A couple months later my father lost the ability to swallow at all, and quickly his health went. I always felt responsible, thinking if I hadn't knocked him down he would be alright right now. 4 years after he passed I relived that moment in my head. How he fell, and how I didn't even help him. How selfish I was, and how I hurt him, my brother, and my family. At points it would wash over me like a dream and I'd come out of it crying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I stopped reliving it. I still wish I could take it back, but I've come to terms with it. Regret is hard though, and I feel for you. I don't know if I was the last person to see her alive, but one of the last. Lori Hacking and her husband Mark Douglas Hacking came into my cell phone store 2 days before she found out about how he had lied to her about pretty much everything in his life, and he killed her and their unborn child. They were both awesome people. She was happy and bubbly, and he was a really nice guy. I came in from the weekend and there was a missing poster on our store door for Lori. It was really weird seeing that she was missing after just selling them cell phones and a plan. I reached out to the number and told them that her and Mark had been into the store 2 days before she went missing. I had to meet with the local police and an FBI agent. They had to look at the paperwork we had done, the video for the store, and interview all of the employees. The weirdest thing is that Mark came into the store after killing her and asked me a question about their cell phone plan after killing his wife and dumping her body. I was one of the last people to see a kid who lived across the street before she was kidnapped. Our neighbors across the street were raising their grandchild because their kid's parent was on drugs. The kid was about 6 to 8 years younger than me, and I used to babysit her sometimes, and she would come over and play with me and my siblings. When I was around 14 and she was around 8, several men broke into the house and kidnapped her. I had babysat her the night before, and I can't remember if she was home alone or if one of the grandparents was there. The police found her about 10 to 12 days later. Her mother owed a lot of money for drugs, and so some of the drug dealers tracked down her kid and kidnapped her to try to get the mother to pay them. I never learned the details of what happened while she was kidnapped, and she has gotten therapy and is now married with kids. Edit. She's doing very well and has a happy life. Sorry everyone, I didn't phrase things well. I wasn't the last one, but one of the last few. He was a close friend of mine, practically family. It lasted the last period of the school day. We sat next to each other and would always goof off. I still remember it clear as day. He asked me if he could come over and hang out. That whole hour he talked about how he didn't want to go home, that his parents were being total asses or something like that. I remember thinking nothing of it really, and then I made a decision that I still regret to this day. I told him I had a bunch of stuff to do after school, which was a lie. I remember the bell ringing, and I do not remember if he said something like "I will see you later" or something like that. I got a text from his brother late that night asking if I had seen him. I told him no. He asked if he could come over, but that was the last I saw him. I tried to call my friend, but no answer, and then I texted him asking if he was okay, to which I never got a response. The school was on edge for those next few days. His family wasn't responding to anyone, and I grew extremely worried. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 days, but they finally found him. Self-inflicted gunshot wound. I still wonder what would have happened if I didn't lie, just told him yes, let's hang out man. Edit. We were told at a school assembly. It's still vivid. I knew something was wrong when they called the whole school in. I sat down and my legs starting twitching because something felt off. Yeah, no. The principal told us, and I remember blurting out oh god, and I just sat there and cried. I was the last one to leave the assembly room. I still think about it occasionally when I hang out with his brothers or hear a certain song on the radio. It has gotten easier with time but still hurts. I know the saying, it's never the ones you expect, and that's so true. He never showed signs of depression or anything. He was literally the coolest kid of the school and a genuine friend. Be kind to others, because you never know what they are going through. A very close family friend that was dealing with the loss of his oldest son, who had committed suicide a few weeks earlier. It was hard on all of us, as they both worked with us on our farm. And I had known the son and the father since I was 3 to 4 years old. He came over for dinner on a Sunday night. He was supposed to come back over Monday morning to help out with farm work. It would be his first day back working since the loss of his son. 4 days go by and he never showed up. We figured it was because he was dealing with his personal drama and didn't read much into it. Although we did reach out several times and went by his house on the second day since we'd seen him. That Friday we were informed by his ex-wife, who was contacted by authorities, that he had killed himself in his truck several miles outside of town in the middle of a field. He had left our home Sunday night and ended his life just an hour or so later. I sometimes feel like our family did not do enough to console him, and that maybe we didn't realize just how much he was struggling in life. It weighs on me occasionally, especially around the time where both of the tragedies occurred. It was a great loss to me, and I have never properly dealt with the emotions. Not 100% sure I was, but pretty close. I was in Colombia as a service missionary. I just got to a new area and pulled up the phone directory the people before me left. There were some records about this guy they were visiting, so I stopped by to introduce myself. He came to the door but was busy, so we set a time for me to come by the next day. About an hour before our scheduled time the next day, I call him to confirm, and he says we are good to go. So I come by an hour later and knock on the door. His girlfriend answered and told us she hadn't heard from him in over an hour and was expecting him to be home. He wasn't answering his phone, etc. Days go by and nobody's heard anything, so she starts putting up missing posters around the neighborhood with a sizable reward. Nothing. About 3 months later I moved to a new city. Not even a week later I get a call from the people that replace me saying they found the guy, but in pieces. I almost threw up and just kind of sat there for the next hour. The latest theory you heard was that he was taken by the FARC, where they either might have tried to get a ransom or make him work for them, then ended up killing him when they were done, or realized they'd get nothing out of it. He was an architect. I don't particularly think he was super well known, but his family was at least more well off than most in this town. So I might have been the last person to talk to him. I never confirmed that, but it still gives me chills when I think about how he was found. I'm not 100% sure if I'm the last person to see this person, but I feel like I am, and didn't know it until after this person was found days later. She had committed suicide. So, about 3 years ago a girl around the same age as me went missing. I live in a tiny community, less than 1,000 people, in a reserve in northern Ontario. So everyone knows everyone. Everyone's first thought is that she ran away or is hiding in someone's house. Another day goes by and our community starts a search team. And by day 3, they finally find her body, hanging, not too deep in the woods off a nearby road. They determined she killed herself 3 nights prior. Died June 3rd, found June 6th. Now, on the night of June 3rd, I was feeling sad and decided to go for a ride around a little community. And as I'm driving around the area she was later found in, I see what I think is a iPhone flashlight in the woods. I didn't think much of it at the time. I have come to conclusion that she was on her way to kill herself and was using her iPhone flashlight cause it was nighttime, obviously. It scares me thinking I might have been the last to see her, and it sucks I didn't know it was her. I haven't told anyone about it. Back in junior year of high school for me, I knew a guy who was in his senior year and I knew him because we worked together at a school job we did. While working we were talking, and he was telling me about how he's gonna go hang out with his friends after work etc. Didn't think much of it. Next day it's reported that he was killed in a drive-by shooting. This was 2 weeks before he graduated high school. I was the last person who had talked to him before he got into his car to drive to wherever he went. Not only myself, my school and especially his close friends became devastated, and following was the proper things such as a funeral and such. During graduation ceremony his name was announced and everyone was asked for a moment of silence as his father walked down the aisle in his position. Truly saddening. It's been 2 years almost now, and his Instagram and other social media are still up. I occasionally pull it up from time to time to look at it. Miss you bud. When I was 13 I went to visit my auntie on a whim. She lived down the hill and we were extremely close. I was late for dinner and I knew my mum would be mad, but when I walked past my auntie something was screaming at me to go inside. My auntie kept saying she was so happy to see me and was dressed up like she was going on a date or something, which I found strange because she was only hanging round at home. We chatted for a bit and was saying some very odd things. Tell such and such this, tell so and so I love them. She told me to take whatever I wanted from her house and her pantry and fridge were completely emptied out, which I thought was weird. The whole thing made my hair stand up, but I was just a kid and didn't understand what was going on. When I eventually left to go home she teared up, gave me a big hug, said she loved me, and was so glad I came by. The next day no one in the family could reach her. The curtains were all pulled at her house and the phone line was cut. After eventually breaking in, my grandma discovered she had hung herself in the closet. Everyone in the family wondered why she didn't leave a note. After 3 years of repressing that memory it resurfaced, and I realized that I was the note. Mucked me up for a long time. When I was in my early 20s I was friends with a group of brothers, one of whom was one of my girlfriend's roommates. On New Year's Eve they threw a party at their apartment. The next morning I was taking the train home and happened to end up on the train with the youngest brother. He was acting normal, but I remember saying to him see you later when getting off the train and him smirking and saying yeah. A few days later, one of the brothers says they haven't heard from him since the party. I told him about the train interaction, and it turned out I was the last person to have seen him. No one else had seen him since the party, including his roommates. They eventually found a note in his apartment that read something like, "I'm fine, but don't try to find me." Several weeks go by with no word from the younger brother. I'm cooking dinner with my girlfriend, and there's a knock on the door. Guess who shows up but the missing brother. He had run away to the Dominican Republic without telling anyone to see what life was like there, ran out of money, and returned. Last person to see him before he disappeared. First person to see him when he returned. Way back in the early 90s, I was traveling. Spent a year traveling around the world, and at the time I was working in a youth hostel in Greece, on Santorini. I had talked about traveling together with a friend from home, but we ended up doing our own trips. Well, 6 months into the trip I meet up with him in Santorini. We hang out for like a week, and he's continuing on eastward, and I was going west. Like 2 days later his flight crashed in the Himalayas near Nepal. All 200 plus people on board died. I wasn't the last person to see him, but was the last person from our home who did. After it happened, I wrote a long letter to his parents and family telling them about our week together on Santorini, and sent some pictures of us. These would be the last pictures his family had of him. The parents were too hurt to acknowledge my letter. I understand, but his sister wrote me and thanked me. That was 28 years ago. One of my best friends found out his wife was cheating on him. He went ballistic, grabbed his gun, and took off to parts unknown. Both the police and I went looking for him for several hours, but couldn't find him. Eventually, he texted me saying he loved me and where we could find his body, which we did. I was the last person he ever spoke to in life. Next year will be the 10th anniversary of his death, and while admittedly I don't think about him every single day, I do think about him and that horrible day a few times each month. Worse, I live in a rural area where lots of people have the same build and wear much of the same clothing he did, so I will occasionally see close doppelgangers of him walking around, and it never fails to flood me with emotion. My friend also ruined Across the Universe by the Beatles. He and I were big fans of the group and that was his favorite song of theirs, so it got played a lot at his viewing. Now, I can't listen to it. The last time I happened to be watching a movie that featured the song, I started crying without even realizing I'd started. I have a slightly different story. I had a friend in college. We got into an argument one night. I said some things about how she had been acting, culminating in that night. I was done. A few months later, I decided to reach out. She had moved out of her apartment and disconnected her phone. Back then we just had landlines. I heard from a mutual friend she had moved back in with her dad. I called her and apologized. I asked her to have a beer with me to catch up. She told me she had stopped drinking, so we met for coffee instead. The argument had really affected her. She decided to do better. She quit drinking, moved home and re-enrolled. I told her I was proud of her and asked if everything was cool at home. Her dad had a history of abuse. She told me it was good, and we promised to keep in touch. I woke up to the police knocking on my apartment door. They found her body a few blocks from her dad's house. I was the second to last person to see her alive. They questioned me. Her car was in her father's driveway. That son of a bitch beat her to death and dumped her body like trash. The police were unable to arrest him right away, and he died in the parking lot of a local bar a week later. They said he had a heart attack. He escaped justice and her murder is technically unsolved. This was in high school. We were at my house after prom, so it was around 3 in the morning, and one of my teammates from my basketball team stopped by with her date, who was her best friend. He stayed for a couple of hours and then headed home. He was extremely devout and didn't want to miss Sunday service. He ended up falling asleep at the wheel, crossed a median and hit another car head on. He and the other driver died. We were the last people to see him. I found out on my way to the beach, and it almost made me crash my car. The next couple of weeks were awful as duck. We live in an area that's really close, 40-minute drive, to some stunningly beautiful mountains in the southwest US. My girlfriend and I had just started to camp with each other, and we planned another trip to a really stunning camp that overlooked the canyon that you drive your car through to get into the mountain range. We had planned to take a couple of friends with us and they came. You need a 4x4 to get to the camp, and after some fun driving we got to the camp. unpacked and prepped for a day of hiking to some hot springs and waterfalls. On our way out we noticed a family walking up and down the road. Eventually, after the third or fourth time passing, they finally walked up to our camp and asked if they had seen a young man, mid-20s, anywhere. They continued to tell us that they drove from another state because they heard that the gentleman in question told his co-worker that he loved it there and wanted to spend some time alone. When they were driving around, they noticed his car on the side of the road in the entrance to the 4x4 trail. We told them we would keep an eye out for him and went about our day. After all of our adventures, we arrived around 5 p.m. to 10 police cars, a few ambulances, search and rescue, and the road quarantined. The police questioned us, letting us know that we weren't suspects, but that he definitely was missing, and they wanted to clear the area first. We figured we could help, so we talked to the search and rescue people and the family, and found out that he was a smoker. This was important because we had noticed leftovers of cigarettes at the lookout and commented about how crummy people can be littering in such a beautiful place. I told them what we saw, and once our sight was cleared they asked if we could show them where it was. Sure enough, we found the spot, saw the trash, and we were able to confirm that it was the same brand of cigs the guy smoked. They got a search dog, but the cliff was extremely dangerous and it was super dark, so they ordered a helicopter to search the cliffside in the morning. The entire night was really eerie. What was usually an extremely secluded and quiet spot had the sound of bells and chimes going off all night while search and rescue and their dogs tried to find him. Fast forward to 7 a.m. The next morning, and the search and rescue helicopter was buzzing our campsite 100 feet off the ground, sending deuce everywhere. After about 10 minutes of this, they stopped right where the cliff was, and we all knew that that moment that the worst thing happened. He had driven up there to kill himself. From what we were told, it looked like he did it a day or two before we got there. He jumped off the cliff. Packing camp up and driving down the road, watching the family stand there in disbelief and sadness was a really devastating way to end what was going to be a fun camping trip and experience for me and my family. On the way out we realized that we had taken some candid pictures of the view a couple hundred feet from the body without realizing it. I still have them and cherish them because it's just a beautiful spot, but I still get a churning feeling in my stomach when I see them. Needless to say, we don't camp at that spot anymore unless it's just showing friends the view. Wherever that family is, I truly wish them the best.